Thank you. Thank you for the invitation and thank you for the great discussion these 2 days. I may ramble a little bit, not only because this projector incident made me nervous, but also because I have serious doubts really about what to tell and the level of rigor, which is a word that we've been mentioning quite often these 2 days, that it will have. I think it was a great idea putting Drew's presentation before mine because I think we are coming from similar backgrounds in terms of the space in which we have defined our personal trajectory and our professional career. Drew is in a probably more hybrid space than mine, or more, I mean, his two hats are more well-defined hats, or well-rounded hats. Because he has an academic position, but he mentioned by the end of his presentation this idea of using the language of curation and the infrastructure of the cultural institutions as a context for research. This is basically what I'm trying to do. I'm not sure if successfully or unsuccessfully, and I'm not sure if in a rigor or shallow way, but in the end, this is the set of ideas that I'm trying to give shape to here in a way. I'm bringing up this picture from Sonar Festival in 2006, which is actually when Drew and me met, because we were together curating the exhibition for this. I don't know if you heard about this event, Sonar. It's a real interesting object of study in terms of cultural dynamics. It's basically a massive rave party happening inside two museums in the heart of a city, completely freezing it for 3 days. This is obviously a massive reduction of what it obviously is. It's a festival for technically the name is Advanced Music and Multimedia Arts. It was one of the events that became, I think, a flagship in the 90s of spaces for showcasing specific kind of cultural production that was very much related to the emergence of new media in the context of art practice in Europe and in Spain, and it's one of the spaces, one of the infrastructures where I started working and where I tried to, in a way, look at ways in which you could locate and situate the emergence of forms of production that were very closely tied to research spaces in a vastly more socialized context. Not all is partying and drinking, although there is a lot of it. This is actually an image from a blast theory project that was hosted in the exhibition that Drew and me co-curated in Sonar in 2006. But obviously, it has problems. The full intent of trying to deploy would be basically a cognitive, knowledge-based, knowledge-transmitting mechanism in this set of conditions. Creates its own set of problems, its own set of high obstacles, and I'm sure that Drew, in a context like Future Sonic, also can speak about something like that. However, if you look at what the other alternative would be, if you are working within the set of the cultural infrastructures, there are also huge problems with that. This is Natalie Jeremijenko piece from an exhibition that I curated in 2008 at the Reina Sofia National Museum of Modern Art here in Madrid. It is probably the biggest project I will ever do in my life. I don't have any expectations of doing anything with a bigger speaker box than the first museum in this country, or obviously with a bigger budget. But to me, it was a perfect example of the problem of trying to locate or situate specific kinds of forms of cultural production today within the framework of contemporary cultural institutions. This exhibition, I think, was successful in certain senses. 600,000 people saw it, so I imagine that on that scale it's a success. It was a complete failure in many other contexts. To me, it was not an exhibition about new media, it was a taxidermy collection of processes, dynamics, and ways of looking at how different actors can engage in relations. Mostly because the language of museology and the context of a highly institutionalized space didn't allow for those parameters that I think were necessary in relating the different elements that are present in a process like this. And actually, this piece, Natalie Yermolyenko's piece, to me was a good example because, basically the idea behind the project is that it's a self-sustainable air renovation device for the building that will allow it to survive in highly environmental harsh conditions. But obviously, as a prototype, it's faulty. The science is not 100% rigorous. It may work or it may not. And what is interesting about it is, I think, the proposition, the discussion, the process of trying to engage with it as a device, really, and what may come out of that. But in a huge museum space, in a white box with a small text sign on the board saying Natalie Yermolyenko, diverse materials, date, and whatever, your real expectations of getting people to engage with the implications of all of that are close to nil. So this is, to me, a serious problem within the framework of how we operate in cultural institutions. This is a project that we did in CCCB, which is the major cultural center in Barcelona, in 2005, called Copified. Copified was basically a conference, a festival, an event, but it was mostly an act of propaganda, really, around the collapse of the intellectual property regime as we understood it, and the emergence of the necessity of engaging in different ways of new models of intellectual property. Obviously, this sounds really old today. In that moment, the media exposure regarding both positions around the copyright wars was absolutely uneven, strongly uneven. I mean, let's say the downloading is stealing gang had all this media share space, and the wait a minute gang had very little. So here, really, our intention was using the resources and the resonating vox of a major cultural institution as a way of trying to make a statement and open a space in media space and in discursive space in a moment that was not possible. From that onwards, I sort of tried to concentrate or think about the development of devices and strategies and even objects that would help to try to locate discourses of both discourses and strategies of research in the context of cultural institutions in different ways. This is a visualization project that I did with Bestiario, which is a data visualization studio from Barcelona, for the AV Festival in England, in the north of England. It's called the Atlas of Electromagnetic Space. And it's basically both a visualization of the radio spectrum, of the spectrum allocation chart, which is basically, the roadmap that shows how frequencies are working in every country. But it's also a database of projects by artists, activists, and studios that are looking at occupation of specific spaces in the radio spectrum in alternative ways. So what we're trying to do is sort of show a parallel understanding of how spectrum regulation should be understood. And a lot of people sort of ask us if this was an art piece, and most definitely was not. Its intention was to be sort of a essay in software form, or a device that somehow, also because the interface was a touch screen, that was the way that would sort of locate it in the context of the institutional space, a way really to try to situate all that information in a place like that. And I've been lately trying to also work in other contexts where you could use the exhibition format and the exhibition language as specialized discourse and essay in a way. This is an exhibition called Habitar that I think it closed 2 weeks ago in a place in the north of Spain called Laboral. And basically the show is about everything that Adam talked today about. So I don't have much to say about it or nothing. But really our interest was working basically with information, and the basic format in this show was information in different languages, from cartography to visualization to different strategies, as a way of trying to engage visitors in a discursive path that would be specialized. What has been worrying me most lately is what is the place or what is the function of research in the context of cultural institutions today. I have to really thank people like Fabien Girardin, who was here yesterday on visit, or Julian Bleecker, who have given a lot of thought to these questions. And I really like this figure they sort of try to define, or these spaces sort of try to define, taking it from Bruno Latour, of hybrid research. And hybrid research would be the kind of research that wouldn't happen within the context of the lab or the academic department as a relatively close, relatively defined, rigorous space, but that would require other parameters. And when Bruno Latour was saying that scientists are no longer alone in the endeavor of formulating the questions to be solved, I think that in the humanities and in the cultural and social sciences, the situation is exactly the same. So I think it's valid, and I think it's important to try to start thinking about what is the place or where would be the spaces where we could start defining this figure of hybrid research. Lately, I've been defining myself as cultural researcher, which I think is probably a bit pedantic and very presumptuous, but it's really about thinking what kind of research you can do in the context of culture and the human sciences out of the context of academic research. And obviously, not only I don't have anything about academic research, I need it and I invite, but I have the feeling that you cannot do obviously academic research within the context of cultural institutions because the parameters are completely different. But also B, there is a kind of research that probably cannot be done in best conditions within the context of academic institutions. So there is, I think, a space and a validity for opening up spaces where those can happen under conditions of flexibility, of interoperability, and of a permanent testing with society. I mean, the idea of open labs and labs that are not only transparent in the sense that you can see what is going on there, but that you can enter and be a part of the process is becoming more and more important in different ways. So I think there is a need for this figure that would be defined like the labs for society, but also labs from society. Labs where really you can test space, you can create spaces where new questions can happen, and the process of research can be also part of a process of social negotiation and opening up ways that will allow many different entry points to the process of research as an object. Now, something that sort of I think has made me convinced of not only the need for this kind of spaces, but the actual existence of a generation of, let's say, hybrid researchers, whether coming from contexts like science, art, design, or architecture, is what I like to call independent research units, which is teams of people who are working today who you would call collectives, or you would call companies sometimes, or you would call studios. But what I think is relevant about them is how they use the methodologies of prototyping, creating tools that would open up paths in different ways, while staying within the context of both cultural institutions and cultural practice. So a few examples here from Spain, which I really like to mention. One is Bestiario, which is this data visualization studio I mentioned before. Now, Bestiario could be a relatively traditional company in the sense of they have clients, they make them commissions, they make projects for them. But first of all, they had from day one really a very transparent attitude to the output of the research, and not only in terms of making it accessible, but also in trying to engage external agents in those processes. Recently, they completely changed their model. They released, as recently as 1 month ago, this tool called Impure, which is basically the outcome of all their years of work in terms of how building visualization projects. And they're trying to sort of give people access to the tool so that they expect that will completely change the relations about how a visualization project is developed, so that not only it lowers radically the point of entry in terms of learning curve, in terms of accessibility to the tool, but also redefines their place in the ecosystem in a way, of the community of people doing data visualization. I'm also very interested by the work of this team called Basurama, basura is trash in Spanish. And they basically do research around trash, or I think they're cultural researchers of trash. That's how they like to see themselves. And one thing that attracts me about their work is that they do art pieces, but they also do advertising campaigns for public institutions, or they do massive curation, or they develop cognitive devices for collaborative involvement. And I think that's a very interesting approach in the way of how you can operate within that context. Another team that I find really interesting is Platonic, Spanish collective. This is probably their best-known project, a Bank of Common Knowledge. It's sort of a workshop infrastructure that can be replicated in different contexts and that try to use the mechanics of, goods of exchange, exchange of goods, applied to the context of exchange of knowledge. So basically you can use a social tagging system where you cross in a specific community what do you know against what would you like to know, and then you allocate specialized knowledge in the community so that who cooks the really good paella, or who can help you with fixing your computer, and then people can ask for specific workshops on specific things, knowing which is the knowledge base that is distributed throughout the community. Or this team, Cemos 98, who originally was a festival, and it's still a festival held in the south of Spain, in Seville, who worked with Juan, who's here, a couple of years ago on a concept that called expanded education, that was really about how learning methodologies were transcending not only their spaces, but also their dynamics in different ways and in different directions. So really what I find in these very different initiatives is a certain set of common values that I'm very interested in exploring in different ways. Like, for instance, the idea that they strongly believe in transparent processes that are always in beta, to speak in software terminology. They rarely define their work as pieces. They define their work as probably spaces of engagement that are permanently revised and executed. Obviously, a very strong transdisciplinary approach in the way that they do. I'm very interested in this space that is defined in the friction points between academics, engineers, designers, and technologies, as everybody else in this room, I'm sure. But I think that there is a case that can be made for the fact that this is a specific space for production of knowledge that is effective and that is happening today. Something that I also find very interesting, and I put a question mark here because I know this is a problematic question, is that for some people this is part of their interest in cultural production, for others this is part of their business plan, and sometimes they don't make strong cases about where one starts and where the other ends. I think sometimes it's very difficult the fact if they are an art collective, a company, or there is no real need to making a strong split between both of them. Lately, very fast, I've been involved in two things, and this is what is really worrying me about now. This is a space that I started in Barcelona last year called Think. It's an office for research and innovation in culture, which means trying to define what is the space for research processes and for innovation in the context of cultural institutions, which is the people that we're working with. And we try to experiment in different ways. These images, for instance, are from a recent workshop that Ivan Roth, an American artist, more known for his work with the Graffiti Research Lab, held with local graffiti writers as part of the beta testing process of a standard he's defining called GML, as in XML, which tries to be a language to define, archive, and preserve graffiti writing. Or this is the local group of open framework developers in Barcelona. Open frameworks is a language for creative endeavors in code, and the local community of open framework developers gather every month and sort of wonder about what is the future of that specific space of production, how can they help to develop it in different senses. I was going to talk a lot about Media Lab Prado because I've been very strongly involved with it in the last 4 years. But since I'm running out of time and we're going there this evening, and you've heard a lot about it, I'm not going to say so much about it. Very fast, I'm very interested in the way that the methodologies that there take place are helping to define this transition from the do-it-yourself to the do-it-with-others, in the context of saying that collaboration seems to be the core in the methodologies that are applied at Media Lab Prado. Once again, I will not explain methodologies very much because maybe this afternoon we'll have some time to do it. But if someone is not coming and is interested, please let me know. Prototyping is the basic tool in the context of Media Lab Prado. I mean, I've come to the conclusion that it's not a research and development space. It's not a production center. It is a research space. Full stop. So that, and I think it's good, and I think it's valid, so that prototyping becomes the basic methodology, because we can produce things that don't necessarily need to be stable and work. I mean, our processes of work are relatively fast but very intense and imply many agents. So this means that everyone sort of can gather around this object or this model that is created. Obviously, outputting everything to documentation. Documentation becomes an essential element because in the end, more than a functional prototype that sometimes can be very functional, sometimes can be a project that exists after the work, like the In the Air project that Adam showed yesterday. But other times it's not. It's the capturing of the whole process happens here. And some key figures that are completely essential. The cultural mediators, which is basically the people working in Media Lab. That would be sort of the equivalent. I like to think of them that way. They are, in the context of a place like Media Lab, the equivalent to those people that are sitting on a chair on a museum telling you not to touch the pieces when watching people. Well, here what they basically try to do is sort of a translation device. It's a social infrastructure that will allow you to, once the processes that take place there have already happened, access that information, decode it, explain you what was the original ideas behind the project, how it came to happen. Actually, there's something that I find very interesting, which is that the cultural mediators are the people who are in charge of writing the blog for every workshop when the workshop takes place. So they have like this sort of very day-to-day relationship to the pieces that before the workshop ends, they will explain to the audience, or they will help the audience to understand. And something that always has been perceived as very important, cañas is this Madrid word for beer. And really that the social space that is quite intensive is supplemented on top of the research space, ends up producing value. Honestly, I mean, and sometimes the joke that we have is that the beer space after the workshop is such an integral part of the research process that the research could not happen without it staying there. So yeah, I think I'll leave it here. Thank you.